February 20th, 1943. North of Kasserine Pass, in the desolate, sun-scorched plains of Tunisia. Through the swirling dust and the acrid smoke of battle, German panzer commanders squint through their vision slits, trying to make sense of what they are seeing. It's not just a battle tactic. It's something unnatural. American Sherman tanks are moving in a way that defies all logic, all training, all doctrine. 5 Shermans, then 10, separated by jagged hills and deep wadis, completely out of sight of one another. Yet they converge on a single German position with a timing so perfect it seems choreographed by a malevolent ghost. There are no signal flags fluttering in the wind, no colored smoke flares arching through the sky, no dispatch riders on motorcycles bouncing precariously between the steel beasts. Nothing. Just a terrifyingly silent, brutally efficient coordination. They move like a pack of wolves, each tank instinctively knowing where the others are, covering their blind spots, creating overlapping fields of fire as if they shared a single mind. For the German crews inside their Panzer I-4s, the world is a chaotic nightmare of noise. The roar of their own Maybach engine is deafening. The crackle and hiss of their Fuji-5 radio is a blizzard of static, a worthless storm of electrical noise. The commander screams into his microphone, trying to coordinate with a tank just 500 meters away, but his words are swallowed by the ether. The 10-watt German transmitters, a marvel of the 1930s, are now helpless against the raw chaos of a moving battle. Worse still, most of his platoon's tanks can't even talk back. They carry receivers only, turning them into little more than steel coffins waiting for orders they can barely hear and unable to report the Tiger tank lurking behind the next ridge. They are isolated, fighting their own individual, desperate battles. But the Americans are fighting a different war entirely. They seem to be whispering to each other across the battlefield, sharing a secret that the Wehrmacht, the pioneers of armored warfare, cannot comprehend. German intelligence reports would later describe this coordination as supernatural, inexplicable. They were right to be mystified. They were witnessing for the first time the birth of a technology that would not only dominate the battlefield, but would define the very future of warfare itself. And they had absolutely no idea it even existed. The secret wasn't a bigger gun or thicker armor. It was something invisible, something that traveled at the speed of light, something that turned every single American tank into a neuron in a collective brain. The secret was a revolution in radio technology called frequency modulation, or FM, and in every single Sherman tank rolling across North Africa sat a 181-pound box of miracles. The Signal Corps radio set, SCR 508. To understand the chasm between the two armies, you have to understand the difference between AM and FM. Imagine trying to listen to your favorite song on an old AM radio during a massive thunderstorm. The crackle of lightning, the buzz from power lines, the static from your car's engine, it all gets mixed in with the music, turning it into an incoherent mess. That was the reality for every German tank commander. Their amplitude modulation radios were exquisitely sensitive to every spark plug firing, every electrical motor whirring, every burst of machine gun fire. It was a symphony of interference. Now imagine listening to that same song on a modern, crystal-clear digital broadcast. The sound is pure, untouched by the storm outside. That was the gift of FM radio to the American tanker. Invented by the brilliant and tragic Edwin Armstrong, FM technology was inherently immune to the static that plagued AM systems. It transmitted a signal so clear, so robust, that an American commander could hear his platoon leader's whisper over the roar of his own engine and the thunder of an artillery barrage. But having a brilliant technology is one thing. Turning it into a rugged, reliable piece of military hardware and putting it in every single tank is another. This is where the story shifts from the battlefields of Tunisia to the factory floors of Chicago. While Germany's brightest minds were focused on building bigger, more complex tanks like the Tiger and the Panther, American industry was solving a different and ultimately more important puzzle. The task fell to the Galvin Manufacturing Corporation, a company you've probably never heard of. But you've definitely heard of the name they adopted after the war, Motorola. In 1941, months before Pearl Harbor, a team of engineers led by the visionary Daniel E. Noble and the Polish-born genius Henryk Magnuski were given an impossible task. Take this new, delicate FM technology and build a radio that could survive inside a 30-ton steel box that shakes, rattles, and gets shot at for a living. The result, the SCR-508, was a masterpiece of engineering. It wasn't just one radio, it was a complete system. It had a powerful BC-604 transmitter, kicking out 25 watts of power, 2.5 times more than its German counterpart. This gave it a reliable range of over 7 miles while moving, a distance at which the German FUG-5 was utterly silent. More importantly, it had two, not one, but two BC-603 receivers. This was a game changer. It meant a tank commander could simultaneously listen to his own platoon's private channel while also monitoring the company command channel. Information flowed up and down the chain of command seamlessly in real time. Orders were received instantly, and battlefield reports from the front line reached headquarters in minutes, not hours. But the real secret sauce was crystal-controlled tuning. In a German tank, the radio frequency was set with a variable capacitor, a delicate component that would drift off frequency with every bump and vibration. A German radio operator was constantly fiddling with the dial, trying to stay tuned. The American SCR-508 had 10 preset channels, each locked in by a quartz crystal. You pushed a button, and you were on the exact right frequency, perfectly clear, every single time. It was the difference between a finely tuned piano and a child banging on a broken keyboard. While the engineers at Motorola were perfecting this weapon, German industry was already falling catastrophically behind. Germany, the nation that invented the Blitzkrieg, the doctrine built on radio-led coordination, was failing to produce the very radios its doctrine demanded. In 1943, for every 3 medium tanks Germany built, it only manufactured 1 full transceiver radio set. The rest were fitted with cheap receivers, or, in many cases, nothing at all. They were building powerful, deadly panzers that were effectively deaf and mute. Meanwhile, America was performing an industrial miracle. The SCR-508 was a complex beast made of 2,948 individual components. Motorola's production lines, which once made car radios, were transformed. In 1943 alone, they churned out over 11,000 of these advanced radio sets. By the end of the war, they had produced over 50,000. It was enough to ensure that every single one of the 49th 324 Sherman tanks that rolled off the assembly lines was equipped with this world-beating technology. 100% deployment. It was an achievement no other nation in the war, friend or foe, could even dream of. The Soviet Union, for comparison, was lucky if 25% of its legendary T-34s had any radio at all by the war's end. The stage was set. America hadn't just built a better radio, it had built a battlefield network, and the Wehrmacht was about to learn a brutal lesson in the importance of communication. Back on the battlefield, this technological chasm translated into a brutal tactical reality. A German panzer platoon was a rigid, fragile hierarchy. The platoon leader, in the one tank with a full radio, was the brain. The other 4 tanks were the muscle, blindly following his lead. American intelligence quickly figured this out. German command tanks often had extra antennas, making them priority targets. Knock out the leader, and the entire platoon was decapitated, becoming a group of confused, isolated units, easily picked off one by one. But in an American platoon, every single Sherman was a potential brain. If the platoon leader's tank was hit, he could simply say over the radio, "Baker 2, you're in command." And instantly, without missing a beat, the next tank took over. The network was self-healing, resilient, and virtually unbreakable. This created a flexibility that consistently baffled German commanders. They were used to fighting predictable, rigid formations. The Americans, however, could create ad hoc battle groups on the fly. A commander could detach 2 tanks from Charlie Company, task them to support a platoon from Able Company miles away, and know with absolute certainty that they could all talk to each other on a pre-assigned channel. It was plug-and-play warfare. This advantage became even more pronounced as the war moved to Italy in late 1943. The mountainous terrain, with its deep valleys and towering peaks, should have been a radio operator's worst nightmare. For the German AM radios it was, the signals would bounce off the mountains, creating a phenomenon called multipath interference, rendering them useless. But again, the magic of FM shone through. FM technology is far more resistant to this kind of interference. While German panzers were reduced to using visual signals in terrain where they couldn't see 100 yards, American Shermans on opposite sides of a mountain ridge were coordinating devastatingly precise attacks, acting as each other's eyes and ears. After-action reports from the U.S. 1st Armored Division are filled with accounts of routine coordination at distances and in conditions that German doctrine considered impossible. To the Germans fighting in those valleys, it must have felt like they were fighting an enemy that could see through solid rock. But the system wasn't perfect. When the Allies landed in Normandy in June 1944, they ran into a new, deadly problem: the infamous hedgerows. This ancient network of dense earthen walls turned the landscape into a claustrophobic maze. Here, the greatest threat to a tank wasn't another tank. It was a single German infantryman with a Panzerfaust, hiding in the thick brush just yards away. And a critical flaw in the American communication network was exposed. The SCR 508 in the tanks operated on a completely different frequency band than the SCR 300 walkie-talkie radios carried by the infantry. A tank commander couldn't talk to the GIs walking right beside him. This communication gap was costing American lives. A squad of infantry could spot a German anti-tank team setting up an ambush, but they had no way to instantly warn the buttoned-up Sherman crew just 50 feet away. The result was a series of catastrophic losses. For a moment, it seemed the invisible advantage had met its match. The solution, however, didn't come from a laboratory in Chicago. It came from the ingenuity of the soldiers in the field. In a brilliant display of battlefield adaptation, tank crews and maintenance units came up with a simple, rugged fix. They grabbed standard EE-8 field telephones, welded an empty ammunition box to the back of the Sherman's turret, put the phone inside, and ran a wire directly into the tank's internal intercom system. Now, an infantryman under fire could run to the back of the tank, pick up the phone, and speak directly to the tank commander, guiding his fire with pinpoint accuracy. "Traverse right! See that busted-up stone wall? There's a Panzerfaust team behind it. Put a round in there now." By the time Operation Cobra kicked off in late July, this simple modification, the tank telephone, had been installed on thousands of Shermans. It had bridged the gap. The network was now complete, linking tanks, infantry, artillery, and even air support into one seamless, terrifyingly efficient, combined arms killing machine. The full power of American radio superiority was about to be unleashed. Operation Cobra was the breakout from Normandy, and it was a showcase for the American battlefield network. The 2nd Armored Division, coordinating hundreds of tanks, infantry, and artillery batteries over their crystal-clear FM nets, moved with a speed and cohesion that stunned the German defenders of the elite Panzer Lehr Division. To the Germans, it seemed the Americans possessed a sixth sense for the battlefield. A weak point in the German line would be identified by a reconnaissance unit. The information would be relayed instantly to command, and within minutes, tanks and artillery, sometimes from different divisions miles apart, would be converging on that exact spot to exploit it. While German commanders were still relying on runners and vulnerable telephone lines to get reports from the front, American generals had a real-time, God's-eye view of the battle. The Panzer Lehr, once the pride of the Wehrmacht, was crippled by communication poverty. Its few remaining radios were useless in the Normandy terrain, and its once mighty Panthers were forced to fight as isolated beasts, powerful but blind. They were systematically hunted and destroyed by swarms of seemingly inferior Shermans that fought with the collective intelligence of a hive mind. The supreme irony of all this was that Germany had literally written the book on armored warfare. Heinz Guderian, the architect of the Blitzkrieg, had championed the use of radios in tanks as early as the 1920s. He understood more than anyone that speed and flexibility depended entirely on communication. His doctrine, which had crushed Poland and France, was built on the principle of command from the front, with officers leading attacks and coordinating movements over the radio. Yet by 1944, the nation he had helped build into a military powerhouse was fundamentally incapable of practicing his own doctrine. German industry, battered by Allied bombing and crippled by inefficient planning, simply could not produce the advanced electronics needed. They were trapped, forced to build technologically superior tanks that were strategically inferior because they couldn't talk to each other. German intelligence services saw the effects of American coordination, but completely failed to grasp the cause. A captured intelligence assessment from September 1944 is incredibly revealing. It states, "American tank units demonstrate good radio discipline and coordination. This appears to result from extensive training and rigid communication procedures." They thought it was just good training. They saw the symptom, flawless teamwork, but were completely blind to the disease, their own catastrophic technological inferiority. It was a staggering failure of imagination. They continued to hunt for command tanks with extra antennas, never realizing that every Sherman was a command tank. They continued to plan ambushes based on breaking up visual contact, never understanding that radio waves made line of sight irrelevant. They were playing checkers while the Americans were playing three-dimensional chess on a board the Germans didn't even know existed. This invisible weapon didn't just win skirmishes, it enabled grand strategic victories that hastened the end of the war. In March 1945, when scouts from the 9th Armored Division discovered the Ludendorff Bridge at Remagen was still standing, the news flashed across the radio nets. Within minutes, the report was at 1st Army headquarters. Within the hour, General Eisenhower himself knew. Divisions across the entire front were immediately rerouted to exploit this incredible stroke of luck, pouring across the Rhine into Germany's heartland. The German response was tragically slow, dependent on telephone lines that were being systematically shredded by American fighter bombers. Their orders were delayed by hours, even days. By the time their counterattacks were organized, the Americans had established an impenetrable bridgehead, with tanks from a dozen different units seamlessly integrated into a coordinated defense, all directed by radio. The final act came in April 1945 with the encirclement of the Ruhr pocket. In a breathtaking display of command and control, American armored columns from the 1st and 9th Armies, hundreds of miles apart, executed a complex pincer movement, coordinating their advance entirely by radio. They slammed the door shut on German Army Group B, trapping over 325,000 German soldiers. Inside the pocket, German communications utterly collapsed. Forward air controllers flying overhead used their own radios to guide fighter bombers onto every German headquarters and telephone exchange they could find. Units became completely isolated from one another. The final radio message from the pocket's commander, Field Marshal Walter Model, before he took his own life, was a testament to the American achievement. No contact with adjacent units, no communication with higher headquarters. Fighting continues, but coordination impossible. The network had defeated the Army. Beyond the tactics and technology, this communications gap created two profoundly different psychological realities. For the American tanker, even when his was the last tank running, even when he was surrounded, and seemingly alone, he was never truly isolated. The voices of his comrades in his headset were a constant connection, a lifeline of information, support, and morale. He was part of a team, a node in a vast, powerful network. For the German tanker, the experience was the exact opposite, a profound and crushing isolation. Often lacking even an internal intercom, he communicated with his own crew by shouting or kicking the driver's seat. Cut off from his platoon, his world shrank to the few hundred yards he could see through his vision slit. Every battle was a lonely, terrifying duel. This psychological edge, the confidence of connection versus the fear of isolation, cannot be measured in millimeters of armor or muzzle velocity, but its impact was immeasurable. After the war, when Allied technical teams poured into Germany, they confirmed what the battlefields had already proven. A U.S. Army report concluded that German tank radio technology was a full 5 years behind American systems. They had built some of the finest tanks in the world, machines like the Panther and the King Tiger, which were individually superior to the Sherman in almost every way. But as one possibly apocryphal, but nonetheless accurate quote attributed to a surrendered German general puts it, "You knew how to make them work together." The lessons were not lost. When West Germany rebuilt its army, the Bundeswehr, in the 1950s, a core principle was communication superiority. A training manual explicitly stated that the defeat of superior German tanks by inferior American vehicles with superior radios teaches that information dominance outweighs platform superiority. That lesson echoes to this day. In the Gulf War of 1991 and the invasion of Iraq in 2003, coalition forces used networked communications to crush larger armies equipped with powerful but poorly connected tanks. The revolution that began in a Motorola factory and was proven in the hedgerows of Normandy had come to define modern warfare. The network will always defeat the platform. The connected will always overcome the isolated. The German troops who faced the Sherman never knew that the most dangerous weapon it carried wasn't its 75mm gun, but the invisible waves that bound it to every other American tank on the continent, creating a weapon system that was, for its time, the most advanced the world had ever seen.